Rancher bought a Chinese woman for $20. But what she asked next broke the lone rancher's heart. The Texas plains were quiet and endless, stretching far into the horizon where the sky met the land in soft shades of gold and blue. The wind blew over the dry grass, making it ripple like waves in a sea. The rancher, a tall and strong man with calloused hands and a weathered face, rode slowly on his old horse. He had lived on this land for many years, mostly alone. His days were filled with work, feeding the cattle, mending fences, checking the water troughs, and making sure the ranch ran smoothly. But beyond the work, there was a quiet loneliness that he had grown used to. He rarely spoke to anyone, and few people knew his name or visited his ranch. Life for him was simple, predictable, and safe in its solitude. One morning, the rancher decided to ride into town. The weekly market was happening near the center of the small town, and while he rarely bought much, he sometimes needed supplies for the ranch. He rode his horse slowly along the dirt road, watching the wooden fences and small houses pass by. As he approached the market, he saw people gathered around a small stall. There was a crowd, some murmuring and some laughing. Curious, the rancher rode closer, his eyes narrowing in interest. At the center of the commotion, he saw something that made him stop in his tracks. A small, thin woman was standing there, her head bowed, her hands tied lightly in front of her. She looked nervous and afraid, glancing at the crowd that had formed around her. She was clearly different from the people he saw in town. Her skin was fair, her hair long and black, and her eyes dark and uncertain. She looked small and fragile, as if she did not belong in this harsh world. The crowd around her spoke in low voices. From what the rancher could hear, they were talking about selling her. They spoke of money, of ownership, and of her value as if she were not a person but an object. His stomach tightened. He had heard of human trading in faraway stories, but he had never seen it with his own eyes. Now, seeing it unfold in front of him, he felt a mix of shock, anger, and deep pity. The trader, a rough-looking man with a crooked smile, held a small sign that said the price. Only $20 for a human life. The rancher's jaw tightened. How could anyone assign such a small price to a person? And yet the people around him seemed indifferent. Some even whispered jokes, while others simply stared. The woman looked at the ground, her body tense, her eyes wide with fear. She didn't speak, but the sadness and fear in her gaze were clear. The rancher dismounted from his horse. His boots hit the ground with a soft thud. He walked closer to the crowd, his presence quiet but firm. People shifted aside, curious to see who this man was. He looked at the woman for a long moment, studying her face, noticing the small details. The way her lips trembled slightly, the way her hands were clenched. There was something in her eyes that spoke of pain, but also of hope, a small flicker that had not been completely extinguished. Without thinking much about what others would say, he reached into his pocket and pulled out $20. The crowd murmured in surprise. They had not expected anyone to take her, especially not a lone rancher who usually kept to himself. He handed the money to the trader, who counted it quickly, grinning as if he had just made a good deal. "She's yours," the trader said, shrugging as he untied her hands. The woman looked up at the rancher, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. She did not speak, but her body language was careful, hesitant, and uncertain. She stepped back slightly, unsure of what would happen next. The rancher offered her his hand, a simple gesture of trust. She hesitated for a moment, then slowly placed her hand in his. Her fingers were delicate, small, and trembling slightly. He helped her onto the horse beside him, making sure she was seated safely. She clung to the horse's side, not to him, careful to keep some distance. The rancher noticed the subtle tension in her shoulders, the way she kept her eyes lowered. He understood that this was not trust, it was survival. She had been through something harsh, and he could see the weight of it in her every movement. The ride back to the ranch was quiet. The woman did not speak, and the rancher did not ask her to. Sometimes he stole glances at her, noticing the small expressions that crossed her face, fear, curiosity, and a faint flicker of something he could not name. He did not know her story, and he did not yet know what to say to her. He only knew that he could not leave her in that market, not after seeing her there, treated as if she were nothing. As the ranch grew closer, the woman looked around, noticing the wide open spaces, the fields of grass, the wooden fences, and the distant cattle. She had never seen land like this, never seen animals roaming freely, never seen the sky stretch so far. For a moment, she seemed to forget her fear and simply took in the view. The rancher noticed her looking at the animals, the horses grazing calmly, the cattle moving slowly. There was a softness in her gaze, an admiration for something she had never known. When they arrived at the ranch, the rancher helped her down from the horse. She stepped onto the ground carefully, holding her skirts and keeping her balance. He handed her some water, which she accepted silently, her hands still shaking. The rancher led her to the main house, a small wooden building with a porch, a kitchen, and a few rooms. It was simple but sturdy, just like the rancher's life. That night, as the rancher lit a small lantern and prepared supper, the woman stayed in a corner, watching quietly. He placed a plate of food in front of her, and for a moment she hesitated. Then, slowly, she began to eat. She ate with care, chewing slowly, as if every bite was a small blessing. The rancher watched her in silence, noticing the careful way she moved, the way she looked at the food as if it were precious. After supper, the woman finally spoke. Her voice was soft, hesitant, and accented, but clear. I want to live with respect," she said, her eyes meeting his for the first time. She did not ask for wealth, comfort, or luxury. She asked only for dignity, for a chance to live her life with meaning and safety. The rancher felt a strange emotion stir inside him, a mixture of awe, sadness, and a desire to protect her. He nodded slowly, unsure what to say. Words felt inadequate. He only knew that he had done something important by bringing her here. He had given her a chance, and in doing so, he realized that he had also given himself something he had long denied, the chance to care for someone else. That night, as the wind blew softly across the plains and the stars began to twinkle above, the woman lay on a simple cot in the corner of the room. The rancher sat nearby, watching over her, thinking about the market, the crowd, and the small flicker of hope in her eyes. He realized that life was unpredictable, and sometimes it brought people together in ways that neither expected. He did not yet know her story, and she did not yet know his. But in that quiet room, under the wide Texas sky, a bond began to form. It was fragile, like the first shoots of grass in spring, but it was real. And though neither of them spoke much that night, both knew that their lives had changed forever. The rancher, who had spent so many years alone, began to understand that there was more to life than solitude and routine. The woman, who had spent so long in fear and uncertainty, began to see a small light of hope. And though the road ahead was uncertain, both of them felt the weight of the first step, trust, compassion, and the fragile beginnings of something new. As he extinguished the lantern and stepped outside onto the porch, the rancher looked at the vast plains around him. He had always seen the land as a place of work and survival, but now he saw it differently. He saw it as a place where lives could change, where hope could grow, and where even the smallest act of kindness could make a difference. Inside, the woman whispered a quiet prayer, not for herself, but for the man who had given her a chance, who had acted with courage and empathy when others had not. She did not yet know how her life would unfold, but she felt a small sense of safety, a feeling she had not known in years. For the first time, she believed that she could survive and perhaps even thrive in this strange, wide, and beautiful land. The night grew deeper and the stars shone brighter. The rancher sat quietly, listening to the wind and the distant sounds of the cattle. He could not have known that this small decision, the purchase of a woman for $20, would change his life forever. But as he looked back at the little cot in the corner, and the quiet, trembling figure of the woman, he felt something unfamiliar. The stirrings of a heart that had begun to open, the beginnings of a connection that could not be measured in money or time. And in that quiet moment, both of them understood something important. That even in a world of hardship, fear, and loneliness, there could be moments of grace, small acts of courage, and the possibility of a bond that could heal both the giver and the receiver. The next morning, the sun rose slowly over the wide Texas plains, spilling golden light across the ranch. The rancher was already awake, tending to the cattle. He moved quietly, his boots crunching on the dirt, his hands rough from years of work. The woman watched him from the porch, her hands folded neatly in front of her. She had not yet learned the ways of the ranch, but she wanted to help, to be useful, to prove that she deserved the chance he had given her. She approached slowly, her steps careful. The rancher noticed her, but he did not look up immediately. He had grown used to working alone, and he was unsure how to involve her yet. Still, he sensed her presence, quiet but steady. Finally, he spoke in his deep, calm voice. "Come help me with the feed." "Watch the cattle carefully." She nodded, her dark eyes bright with determination. She followed him to the barn, watching his movements, trying to learn quickly. He showed her how to fill the troughs with water, how to scatter the feed evenly, and how to check the health of the animals. She listened closely, repeating his instructions in her soft, accented English. Sometimes she hesitated, unsure of the words, but he only smiled faintly and repeated them patiently. As the day passed, she began to gain confidence. Her hands moved more steadily, her posture more assured. She discovered that she had a natural way with the animals. The horses seemed calm around her, the cattle followed her calmly, and even the chickens clucked softly as she moved among them. The rancher watched quietly, surprised. He had not expected her to adapt so quickly. During a brief rest in the shade of a tree, she finally spoke. Her voice was soft but filled with meaning. I want to learn everything. I do not want to only work. I want to know how to live with respect." She paused, her gaze dropping to the ground. "Please teach me." The rancher was taken aback. Her words were simple, yet heavy with honesty and courage. She did not ask for money, comfort, or freedom from labor. She asked only for knowledge, for guidance, for dignity. Her request touched something deep inside him. For so many years he had lived a life of solitude, never thinking he could or should guide someone else. Yet hearing her plea, he realized that he could not ignore it. He nodded slowly. "I will teach you," he said. "You must work hard, you must listen. But you will learn." His voice was firm, yet there was a softness he rarely allowed himself to show. The days that followed were full of routine, work, and small lessons. The rancher taught her how to care for the cattle, how to ride horses without fear, how to mend fences, and how to manage the small garden near the house. She learned quickly, her hands moving more confidently, her mind absorbing each instruction. Yet she did not just work with her hands. She also asked questions, curious about the world, about the land, and about life itself. One afternoon, as they worked in the garden, she paused and looked at him carefully. "Why, you help me?" she asked, her voice uncertain. "I am not your family, I am stranger." The rancher stopped for a moment, his hands resting on the hoe. He looked at her, studying her face. Her eyes were earnest, searching, and open. He thought of the market, the crowd, the fear in her gaze, and the small spark of courage that had brought her here. "Because it is right," he said simply. "Because no one should be treated like that, and because you deserve it." Her lips trembled slightly, and for a moment tears filled her eyes. She looked down at the ground, embarrassed to show her emotions, yet unable to hide them completely. The rancher felt a strange stirring in his chest. He had never seen anyone so humble, so honest, and so brave at the same time. As the weeks passed, their bond grew stronger. She began to trust him more, and he, in turn, allowed himself to notice her presence in ways he had not allowed before. She laughed quietly when she succeeded at a task, and he noticed the sound. It was soft, pure, and unforced. She asked questions about the animals, the land, and even about his life. Slowly, she became more than just someone he had rescued. She became a companion in the quiet, lonely life he had lived for so long. One evening, after a long day tending the cattle and repairing fences, they sat together on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky was painted with shades of pink, orange, and purple. The rancher sat in his old wooden chair, silent, while she carefully arranged the tools they had used during the day. Finally, she looked up at him and spoke, her voice trembling slightly. I have no family, no one. My life is empty. I never had anyone who cares." Her hands fidgeted in her lap. "Can I stay with you, not just work, but live with respect?" The rancher's chest tightened. Her words were simple, but they carried a weight he had not expected. She was asking for more than shelter and safety. She was asking for connection, for trust, for belonging. He looked at her quietly, unsure what to say. His life had been built on solitude, and the idea of opening his heart to someone else both terrified and moved him. He finally spoke, his voice low and steady. "You may stay, you will be safe here, and I will help you learn to live with respect." He did not add anything more, but his eyes betrayed the emotions he did not speak. There was something new in his heart, a mixture of responsibility, protectiveness, and the faint beginnings of affection. Over time, she began to feel at home. She learned to cook simple meals, clean the house, and tend the garden. Each task was a small victory, and she began to smile more, laugh more, and speak with more confidence. She learned the names of the animals, remembered the routines, and even began to help him with tasks he had once done alone. The rancher noticed her growing confidence, and he felt pride, though he rarely admitted it. One afternoon, as they were repairing a fence, a sudden windstorm blew across the plains. Dust swirled around them, and the horses in the distance became restless. She froze, unsure of what to do. The rancher moved quickly, shielding her with his body and guiding her to safety. When the storm passed, she looked at him with wide, grateful eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "You protect me." The rancher nodded silently, but inside his heart was full. He had protected her from the storm, but he realized she had also protected something inside him, his heart, his humanity, and his sense of compassion. As the weeks turned into months, their daily routine became a rhythm of work, learning, and quiet companionship. She taught him patience, empathy, and the importance of small joys, like watching a calf take its first steps, seeing the first bloom of a flower in the garden, or simply sharing a quiet meal together. In return, he gave her safety, guidance, and the steady presence of someone who cared. One evening, as they sat by the fire, she spoke again. I never knew anyone could care like this. I thought life is only fear and work and nothing else." She paused, her eyes shining in the firelight. "You gave me hope." The rancher looked at her quietly, feeling a lump in his throat. He had lived so long avoiding attachments, avoiding emotions, avoiding responsibility beyond the land and animals. But now, sitting across from her, listening to her words, he felt something he had not felt in years: connection, warmth, and a deep sense of purpose. He did not respond immediately, only nodded slightly. Words were not necessary. She understood that he meant what he had said. She was safe, respected, and valued. That night, as the wind whispered across the plains and the stars began to shine, she lay in her small cot, thinking about her life. She had faced fear, danger, and loneliness for so long, and now, for the first time, she felt a sense of belonging. She knew the road ahead would not be easy, but she also knew that she had someone who would guide her, protect her, and trust her. The rancher stepped outside, looking at the vast expanse of land he had called home for so long. He thought of the market, the woman, and the choice he had made. For a moment, he realized how small that decision seemed compared to the changes it had brought. He had given her a chance at life, and in return, she had brought life into his own heart. And so their days continued, simple, hard, but full of small victories, trust, and the beginnings of a bond that neither of them had expected. The woman, once a stranger, was now slowly becoming part of the ranch, part of his life, and part of his heart. The rancher, once a man of solitude, was beginning to understand that even in a life of work and isolation, there could be moments of joy, connection, and unexpected love. By the end of the month, she had settled into her new life with a quiet determination. She worked hard, learned quickly, and began to smile more freely. The rancher watched her progress, feeling pride, admiration, and a growing affection he did not yet fully understand. And though the future was uncertain, both of them knew one truth: they had found something rare and precious: trust, compassion, and the fragile beginnings of a life shared together. The days passed slowly but surely on the ranch, each one blending work, learning, and quiet companionship. The woman had grown more confident in her tasks, moving through the fields, barn, and stables with grace and efficiency. Her hands were no longer trembling when she fed the cattle, brushed the horses, or tended the garden. She had learned quickly, and the rancher had begun to trust her abilities, allowing her to take small responsibilities on her own. Yet, despite her growing confidence, there were moments when her eyes betrayed a deeper vulnerability. Late at night, she would sit quietly near the fire, staring into the flames, her face shadowed with longing and memories that she did not speak aloud. The rancher noticed these moments, but he did not pry. He had lived a long life of solitude, understanding that some things could not be forced. He only made sure she was safe and warm, offering his presence without words, letting her know she was not alone. One morning, as the sun rose over the horizon and painted the sky in soft shades of pink and gold, the woman approached the rancher as he repaired a broken fence near the edge of the pasture. She held a small bundle of tools in her hands, her dark eyes focused on him. I want to help more," she said softly, her accent gentle but clear. I want to learn everything you know about ranch life." The rancher paused, wiping the sweat from his brow. He studied her carefully. Her desire to learn was genuine. It was not out of obligation or fear. It was out of respect and determination. He felt a mixture of pride and surprise. He had not expected someone to care so deeply about work, life, and knowledge all at once. "Very well," he said, handing her a hammer. Then we will start with the fence repair properly. Watch carefully, then try it yourself." She nodded eagerly, her hands steady this time, her determination clear. She mimicked his movements, learning quickly. The rancher watched her, impressed by her ability to grasp things so fast. He did not realize it, but each moment he spent teaching her brought them closer together. She was no longer just someone he had rescued. She was becoming a companion, a student, and slowly a part of his life. As the days turned into weeks, the bond between them deepened. They worked side by side in the fields, repaired fences together, fed the cattle, and cared for the horses. The rancher began to notice the small ways she brought life to the ranch. She sang quietly as she worked, her voice soft but melodious, filling the open plains with warmth. She laughed when small accidents happened, like a calf stumbling or a horse nuzzling her unexpectedly. And though he rarely showed it, he felt a strange joy in these moments, a feeling he had not experienced in years. One evening, after a long day of work, a sudden storm approached. Dark clouds rolled across the sky, and the wind picked up, whipping dust and leaves through the air. The horses in the pasture became restless, and the cattle huddled together nervously. The woman froze, unsure what to do, her eyes wide with fear. The rancher acted quickly. "Come with me," he shouted, holding out his hand. She ran toward him, her steps hesitant but fast. He guided her to the barn, keeping a steady grip on her arm as the wind lashed against them. Once inside, he checked to make sure the animals were safe, calming the horses and moving the cattle to shelter. She watched him with awe, her fear slowly giving way to relief. After the storm passed, the woman turned to him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. "You protect me." Her voice trembled slightly, but there was a quiet strength in it as well. The rancher nodded, saying nothing. Inside, he felt a surge of emotion, a mix of pride, protectiveness, and something else he could not yet name. She had trusted him completely, and in return, he had acted without hesitation to keep her safe. In the following weeks, the woman grew more comfortable with the ranch. She began taking initiative, caring for the animals without constant guidance, fixing small things around the house, and helping the rancher manage the daily chores. She also began to open up in small ways, sharing stories about her life before the market, about the hardships she had endured, and about her hopes for the future. The rancher listened quietly, rarely interrupting, but always absorbing her words. He had never realized how much he could care for someone else, how deeply another person could touch his heart. One afternoon, as they rested under the shade of a large oak tree, she looked at him carefully. I have never had anyone who cares," she said softly. "I never knew life could be like this. I thought fear is everything and I have no hope, but now I feel hope." Her voice faltered slightly and tears formed in her eyes. She looked down, embarrassed by her own emotions, but unable to hide them completely. The rancher's chest tightened. He had not expected her words to affect him so deeply. Her honesty, her vulnerability, and her trust moved him in ways he had long thought impossible. For years, he had avoided attachments, believing that solitude was safer than caring for others. Yet now, sitting beside her, he realized that the risk of opening his heart was worth the reward. He reached out quietly, resting a hand on hers, a gesture of comfort and reassurance. In the days that followed, their bond continued to strengthen. She began to see him not only as a protector or teacher, but as someone she could rely on emotionally. She asked him questions about his life, about his past, and even about his dreams, things he had never shared with anyone. And though he rarely spoke about himself, the simple act of listening and being present became a form of intimacy, a connection that neither of them had experienced before. One evening, after a long day of tending the animals, she gathered her courage and spoke. I never had a family, never had anyone call me daughter or sister or even friend," she said softly. Her eyes searched his face, seeking an answer, seeking acceptance. "Can I call you father, not because you must, but because I want someone to care like a father?" The rancher felt a sudden pain in his chest. Her words were simple, yet they carried a weight that pierced his heart. He had spent a lifetime avoiding attachments, avoiding vulnerability, and yet here was someone asking him to be more than he had ever been. To be family. To open his heart fully. He looked at her quietly, seeing the hope and fear in her eyes, and realized that this small request carried more meaning than he could have imagined. He did not respond immediately. Instead, he reached out gently, resting his hand on hers, a silent promise that he understood. He had never thought he could feel such a connection to another person, and yet he did. He felt a responsibility, a protectiveness, and a strange warmth that he had long thought lost. From that moment, their relationship began to transform even further. She worked with renewed purpose, not just out of necessity, but out of a desire to contribute to the life they were building together. The rancher, in turn, began to notice the small joys of companionship, the laughter, the shared tasks, the quiet moments of trust and care. Life on the ranch was no longer just work and routine. It had become a shared journey, a partnership built on respect, trust, and growing affection. One late afternoon, as they repaired the barn roof together, she slipped slightly on a plank. The rancher caught her quickly, holding her steady. "You must be careful," he said, his voice low but firm. She looked up at him, her eyes wide, and nodded. I will be careful," she whispered. In that moment, the rancher felt a rush of emotion, fear, relief, and a deep, unspoken connection. She trusted him completely, and he, in turn, would do anything to protect her. As the months went by, the woman continued to adapt to life on the ranch, and the rancher continued to learn from her as well. She taught him patience, the importance of small joys, and the value of emotional connection. He began to laugh more, to notice beauty in simple things, and to allow himself to feel emotions he had long suppressed. One evening, as the sun set over the plains, painting the sky in orange and purple, the woman turned to him. Her voice was soft, trembling slightly but filled with sincerity. "You saved me, not only from the market, but from loneliness, fear, everything. You gave me hope. But do you feel hope too?" The rancher paused, his eyes fixed on the horizon. He thought of the days they had shared, the storms they had faced, the trust they had built. He realized that she had indeed brought hope into his life in ways he had never imagined. He nodded slowly, unable to find words that could fully express the depth of his feelings. For the first time in years, he felt a connection that went beyond work, beyond routine, and beyond the solitary life he had known. And so life on the ranch continued, a mixture of hard work, learning, laughter, and growing emotional connection. The woman, once a stranger and a victim, was now becoming a part of the rancher's life in ways that neither had expected. And the rancher, once a man of solitude and avoidance, was learning that opening one's heart, taking a risk, and embracing connection could bring a depth of fulfillment and joy that he had never known. Their bond had grown strong, built on trust, respect, and the fragile beginnings of love, not romantic, but the love that forms between people who protect, guide, and care for one another. And though challenges would continue to arise, both of them knew one truth, that life was richer, fuller, and more meaningful because they had found each other. The ranch had changed over the months. What was once a quiet, lonely place now hummed with life. The cattle moved more smoothly through the fields, the horses seemed calmer, and even the small garden near the house flourished under the woman's careful hands. The rancher noticed all these changes, but the most remarkable change was not in the land, it was in him. His heart had softened. His days, once measured only by work, now had meaning, purpose, and companionship. The woman had become more than a helper or a student. She was part of the ranch itself, part of the rhythm of daily life, and slowly part of his heart. She would rise early to help with the chores, tending the animals before the sun fully rose. She learned not just to perform tasks, but to anticipate them, filling water troughs before they ran dry, guiding the cattle gently, and making sure the horses were calm and fed. The rancher watched her quietly, impressed and deeply moved by her dedication and intelligence. One morning, as the sun spread light over the plains, she approached him with a small basket of eggs from the hens. Her hands were steady, and she smiled as she held it out to him. I did this for you," she said softly. "You work so hard, I want to help more." The rancher took the basket, feeling the weight of both the eggs and her gesture. It was simple, but in that small act he felt the depth of her care. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You have done well." He realized that she was not just learning from him, he was learning from her too. She had taught him patience, trust, and the joy of small accomplishments shared with someone who truly cared. As the days went by, their bond deepened even further. The woman began to open up more about her past. She told him about her life before the market, about the hardships she had faced, and about her dreams of a life with dignity and respect. The rancher listened quietly, never judging, only absorbing her words with a careful attention that he had reserved for the land and animals. One evening, after a long day in the fields, They sat together on the porch, watching the sky turn orange and purple as the sun set. The woman looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and sadness. I never thought I could have a life like this," she said softly. "I never had anyone care for me like this. You gave me everything." The rancher felt a lump in his throat. Her words were simple, but the meaning behind them was profound. She had endured so much pain and fear, and yet she had managed to find hope again. He realized that he had not only saved her, but had been saved himself, saved from a life of isolation, saved from the emptiness he had felt for so many years. As the weeks continued, their connection grew stronger. She began to take more responsibility around the ranch, not just performing tasks but managing them, making decisions, and helping the rancher plan for the future. The rancher, in turn, began to rely on her not just for work but for emotional support. They shared quiet moments of laughter, small celebrations of success, and even the occasional evening of reflection by the fire. One day, a traveling trader passed near the ranch. He stopped for a short visit and noticed the woman working confidently among the animals. He was surprised at her competence and the way she moved with ease and purpose. The rancher simply smiled quietly, saying nothing. He had seen her growth every day, had witnessed her determination and resilience, and knew that her worth could never be measured by the small sum that had brought her to him. That night, as the stars shone brightly over the plains, the woman spoke again, her voice soft but firm. I want to stay here forever. I do not want to go back to fear, to pain, to the life I had. Can I stay with you?" Her eyes searched his face, seeking reassurance, seeking acceptance. The rancher felt his chest tighten. Her words were simple, yet they carried the weight of her entire past and the hopes of her future. He thought of all the months they had spent together, the work, the learning, the laughter, and the small joys they had shared. He realized that he could not imagine his life without her. He had come to care for her deeply, more than he had expected, more than he had allowed himself to feel for anyone. He nodded slowly, his voice low but steady. "Yes, you will stay. You are part of this ranch and part of my life." He reached out his hand and she placed hers in it. In that moment, the distance that had once existed between them, fear, mistrust, and loneliness, vanished. What remained was connection, trust, and the beginnings of a family. In the weeks that followed, the ranch became even more harmonious. The woman took on more tasks, managing the daily routines with confidence. She cared for the animals, tended the garden, and even helped the rancher plan for the future. The rancher, in turn, allowed himself to enjoy the small joys of life, sharing meals, watching the sunset, and listening to her stories. They had built a life together, based on respect, trust, and mutual care. One afternoon, as they worked together fixing a broken fence near the edge of the property, she paused and looked at him carefully. "You saved me," she said softly, "but you also saved yourself. You opened your heart like I never thought anyone could." Her eyes glistened in the sunlight, filled with both gratitude and affection. The rancher felt a warmth in his chest that he had never known. Her words were true. She had not only found safety, trust, and hope, but she had also brought life, joy, and connection back into his world. He realized that love and compassion, even in their simplest forms, could transform a life completely. As the months turned into seasons, the ranch flourished under their care. The animals were healthy, the fields well-maintained, and the house clean and welcoming. Yet the true transformation was not in the land, it was in the people. The rancher, once a man of solitude and routine, had learned to open his heart. The woman, once a stranger sold for $20, had discovered safety, respect, and a family she had never known. One quiet evening, as the wind whispered softly across the plains and the stars sparkled above, they sat together on the porch. The rancher looked at her, his heart full of pride, affection, and a deep sense of fulfillment. "You have changed everything," he said softly. "Not just the ranch, but my life. I never knew it could be like this." She smiled gently, leaning slightly toward him. "And you changed mine. I never believed life could be kind or safe or full of hope. But now I know." Her voice was soft but steady, carrying the weight of her gratitude and the depth of her emotions. The rancher nodded quietly, feeling a sense of completion, of peace. He realized that the simple act of helping another person, of giving her a chance to live with dignity and respect, had transformed both their lives. He had found companionship, purpose, and a family in the most unexpected way. From that moment, their lives continued in harmony. They worked together, laughed together, and shared the quiet moments that made life meaningful. The rancher was no longer alone, and the woman was no longer a stranger. Together, they had built a life based on trust, care, and the simple but powerful truth that even small acts of kindness could change a life forever. The story of the rancher and the woman spread quietly through the small town. People noticed the change in him, the way he smiled more often, the way he laughed, and the care he showed not just to her but to everyone around him. They whispered about the woman, about her resilience, intelligence, and kindness. Yet the rancher did not care about gossip or recognition. He only cared that she was safe, happy, and respected, the life she had asked for when she first spoke to him months ago. One day, as they watched a calf take its first steps, she looked at him with bright eyes. "See," she said softly, "life can be beautiful. We make it so." The rancher smiled, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction and love. He had come to understand that life was not just about survival or work. It was about connection, care, and the courage to open one's heart to others. And in the quiet plains of Texas, amidst the cattle, horses, and open sky, he had found something priceless. A bond that could never be measured in money or time. A bond that had begun with a simple act of compassion and had grown into a family, a home, and a heart full of hope. And so the rancher and the woman continued their life together. They faced challenges, storms, and hard work, but they faced them side by side. The woman, once sold for $20, had found safety, respect, and love. The rancher, once lonely and isolated, had found connection, purpose, and a heart open to another human being. Together, they had created a life filled with trust, compassion, and joy. A life that neither had expected, but both had worked to build hand in hand. And on the quiet nights, when the wind whispered across the plains and the stars shone brightly above, they would sit together on the porch, holding hands, and know the truth that had brought them together. That even the smallest acts of kindness could change a life forever, and that love, respect, and hope could grow in the most unexpected places, transforming both the giver and the receiver in ways that words could never fully describe.